So just go around and introduce yourselves, and then we'll crack on with the talk. Do you want to start, Martin?
Sure. Hi, I'm really happy to be here with everybody in this festival. I think it's a really cool initiative. Yeah, I'm Martin Calisto, and I am a PhD student at Utrecht University. I'm working now on the circular economy and the different discourses and policies that lead to it, including its visions of degrowth and alternatives from the global south, such as Buen Vivir.
Thanks for that, Dan. Just come over to you, just because you're next on the row of talkers there. Dan's actually one of us. So Dan, if what I'll do then, Dan, I'm going to hand over to you to lead this discussion if you like, and I'll just take the back seat then, if that's all right with you.
Yeah. So yeah, welcome. Hello. So I'm also calling from the Netherlands by organizing a festival that came out of Manchester. This beautiful notion that going digital means that we can actually expand much further and have some really interesting conversations. So we're delighted to be able to speak about the circular economy with some experts, if I can call you guys that. You're happy with that? So yeah, for me, I'm really excited to be able to welcome these kinds of conversations into festivals, which festivals in general tend to be not so circular. And we've worked a lot to figure out how you can make that happen in communities and collectives and in general organizations, but it's a learning process. So I'm really curious to kind of hear more about how degrowth and circular economy in general affects our everyday lives, everything that we kind of interact with.
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic, and we hope we can, we can provide some information that will be useful for you guys and for the audience.
Great. So I guess in terms of questions, I wrote them down, but obviously they're on Zoom, so I have to go into the background. So I gathered that you have a little kind of presentation lined up.
Yeah, that's right.
And you may want to do like a little introduction first to kind of go through your presentation. But yeah, when you're ready, obviously feel free to take it away.
Yes, sure. So maybe I can just share my screen and can I share my screen? Because now I see the host disabled participant screen sharing, because this would be nice. We prepare as a short PowerPoint and yeah, just
okay.
Give basis.
I've just enabled that now.
Thanks, Judah. Glad you didn't go away.
Cool. So there we go now. You can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Perfect. So, well, good afternoon, and we're here on the behalf of the Dutch degrowth platform called Ontgroei, and we're going to talk about degrowth as an alternative to the capitalist growth system. Degrowth is all about system change, about rethinking the way we organize our societies. That is why I first want to talk about the present system based on growth and why it is not delivering on its promises. Then we will introduce degrowth as one of the alternative ways forward. We'll talk about practices and principles that are being enacted already all around the world. Finally, we'll share our thoughts on how each of us can do something to build a new system that serves the people and the planet. Well, Martin already introduced himself, and my name is Olga Koretskaya. I'm doing a PhD at Erasmus University Rotterdam, and my focus is on making practices and how they can facilitate sustainability transformation beyond capitalism. Ontgroei is the Dutch platform. We have a website, we also have a Twitter and Facebook accounts. And even though the name is in Dutch, a lot of content is in English. So if you're interested in the topic of degrowth, you're very welcome to join us and stay in touch. And now let's talk about growth. What is it? Growth can be seen as an evolutionary phenomenon, which has a very positive connotation in our cultures. We like to see plants, children grow. We like to talk about personal growth as something very positive, and it is. But economic growth as an objective has a very different meaning. It implies that no matter the circumstances, every year we need to accelerate the production of goods and services. It is a very recent phenomenon as well. it was introduced as a policy objective and a measure of a country's success only in the 1950s, so about 70 years ago. On the graph, which covers kind of our history from the first to the 21st century, you can see this thin blue line at the end, which shows the gross world product. This notion has been around only for a very brief moment in time. Still, it really dominates our discussion and our mass media coverage. We talk about growth with connection to elections, pension systems, and even global pandemics, such as COVID-19. And we're often very much concerned with how these events influence the magic GDP number. And you can wonder what's wrong about that. Quite a few things, because GDP measures not just the amount of goods we produce, so the products that bring positive value to the society, but also the amount of bets, so products which bring negative value to the society, such as cigarette advertising, such as ambulances, such as locks on our doors, and the jails that we, built to lock people down. It counts the destruction of redwoods, and it counts the loss of natural wonder, as Robert Kennedy put it in 1968. The global economy doubles in size about every 20 years. And that's what we mean by exponential growth, right? And it means that every 20 years, we double the amount of extracted resources, and we double the amount of waste that we throw into our oceans and put in our landfills, because so far our economies have been built as very linear production systems. And ironically, it means that by this point in time, our growth has become uneconomic, which means that the cost of new products outweigh the benefits. And you can think of a plastic bag as an example. So we use plastic bag for like an hour or so when we go from a grocery shop to our house, but then we throw it away and it degrades for centuries, and it ends up as a microplastic in our blood and in our water. On the global scale, the rate acceleration or the exponential increase in water, energy use, plastic, paper production, and so on directly correlates to the Earth system trends. So on the right side, the blue graphs, we can see the steep increase in CO2 and methane emissions, in ocean acidification, in surface temperatures. And these are not desirable dynamics, because they actually mean the death of coral reefs, of land degradation, they mean biodiversity loss. And only recently have we realized that our Earth has boundaries that we need to respect in order to secure a safe operating space for humanity. And with the present economic system, we are violating these boundaries one after another. And if everyone had lifestyles as we have them in the global north, we would need 3 planets to support such lifestyles. But when we think about redistribution of the fruits of growth, they are not so even. Only 5% of all new income from global north, or from global growth, trickles down to the poorest 60%. And globally, we know that 1% owns half of the global wealth. Well-being for average people has not increased since the 1970s. In fact, we see that societies experience no substantial increase in happiness after a certain level of growth that we achieve. For example, you can see GDP in the US is 3 times more than GDP per capita in Portugal, but still people in Portugal live longer, and which means healthier lives. In the final slide from my side, as COVID-19 has shown, when we try to push the brakes and slow down, we can see that the present system collapses, and we see recession, we see unemployment, we see wage cuts, the closure of schools and hospitals. And that is why we need to think of a systematically different way of organizing our societies, so that we can ensure well-being for all people, and thriving ecosystems that can support life for our generation and generations to come, whether some sectors of the economy has to grow or if they don't grow. And now Martin will go into this into more detail. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and Martin will continue. Martin, you're on mute.
Whoops, sorry, I was muted. I will share my screen and present the rest of our presentation. So basically, what is degrowth? It's, you know, an alternative to the growth system and therefore an alternative to capitalism, because the current system cannot conceive of life and cannot operate in conditions of degrowth. So we have to think about an alternative. Just to briefly give a definition, degrowth is a planned downscaling of production and consumption that increases human well-being and enhances ecological conditions and equity on the planet. Now, how to get there? What does this mean? As I said, it means not recession, as Olga pointed out as well. It means not having an economy that just doesn't grow and you know, has zero GDP growth or even minus GDP growth, or like the conditions that we've had now during the Corona crisis, because that would just not be good for anyone. It means a completely different system, one that does not need growth to operate, one that does not necessitate to continuously expand its capital and destroy nature and life and commodify everything that is in order to be. Well, there are many ways to conceive of degrowth. It's a plural system. It's not something that exists in a monolithic term. Degrowth is being conceived of as many post-capitalist worlds. As the Zapatista put it in Mexico, it is a world in which many worlds fit. So the idea is not constructing another uniform vision that we implement in a very kind of universal way above anybody, but rather trying to create a plurality of diversity of alternative ways of being that are post-capitalist and therefore beyond conceptions of development, of economic growth, productivism, of consumerism, of excessive rationality and in focusing too much on the things rather than on what is and what really matters, that is human happiness and well-being. So the idea is actually not new. Degrowth thinking actually really as a concept grew and originates from the 70s, specifically with new concerns about the limits of industrial civilization, specifically through books such as The Limits to Growth that were published in the 1970s, but also a myriad of alternatives that originated around this time, from design thinking, such as Design for the Real World, Small is Beautiful, that proposes Buddhist ecological transition, from anarchist the traditions, and from a myriad of different positions. And therefore, it's a very old debate that has been here for a long time, but of course, it hasn't get the attention of the mainstream debate because it challenges the very source of meaning in the system and the very source of necessity of reproduction of the system, which is growth. The term degrowth itself was first coined by André Gorce, a French ecological economist, that termed the idea of décroissance in his book Ecology as Politics in the 1970s. But there are many other ways to conceive degrowth from the global south and from the global north, such as buen vivir in Latin America and the indigenous cultures of Latin America. But you also have voluntary simplicity, you have eco-socialism, you have transition towns, you have donut economics, and a lot of plural visions that properly develop an alternative to the growth-based capitalism. Now, to sum up most of these systems, and I'm just going to generalize a little bit because we're proposing an introduction of all this degrowth thinking, they all sum up to three main ideas: democratization, ecological sustainability, and redistribution and solidarity. Now, democratization means democratizing both politically, means creating democracies that are real, not just representative, but that are direct and that go from the grassroots to the top. And also democratization in the economic system, meaning worker-owned cooperatives instead of traditional capitalist enterprises. It also means redistribution and solidarity. You cannot have a degrowth system if you don't redistribute. Otherwise, the worst of citizens of the world will just be even worse off. The idea is to reconstruct the system and redistribute the gargantuan and unfathomable amounts of wealth in the hands of a few to benefit the conditions and the well-being of all those that necessitate them, and all while, of course, being ecologically sustainable. And this is the key three principles, the pillars I think that is present in all degrowth propositions. Now, let's go to some practices to have a better idea of what this looks like in reality. We have, for example, local cooperatives, as I said, so production systems where the workers are direct owners of firms instead of having it as a private property, you know, market shares and people that have nothing to do with a company owning a company. You know, in a degrowth world, companies and production processes are owned directly by workers through cooperatives. You also have ideas such as repair cafes, where people come and repair their goods. You have systems like the reverse supermarket. This is the SMIC Val market in France, which is basically a reverse supermarket. People bring whatever old goods they don't need and let them there, and also take whatever needs and goods they see that they find useful, and it's just for free. And people come and it's actually been a tremendous success. People have had such a good response to this that it's been replicated throughout France now. And it's a tremendously exciting way to share resources, to get rid of things that we don't need and to give them to people that might need them. We also have democratic experiments such as citizen councils. Citizen councils are groups of randomly selected citizens that deliberate or talk about a specific issue. In this case here, I'm presenting a picture of the deliberative council created in France as a response to the Gilets jaunes protests, where basically 150 French citizens were randomly selected to represent generally the French population. Random selection is the birthplace of democracy in Athens and continues to be the most direct way to represent citizen voices in a system where there's many more people than can be sitting in a table. So by random selection, you get a real group of the real society presented there. And they were discussing how to lead to a zero carbon future for France by 2030. And they came out with extraordinary propositions that are pretty much more sustainable and much more transformative than anything that any bureaucrat came through or any politician came through, showing that if you put citizens together in a democratic process, randomly selected people that didn't know each other will come out with more intelligent and more transformative choices than your random politician that is elected through these pseudo-democratic processes that just represent and replicate elite structures. You also have another system such as participatory budgeting, which is a system by which people determine the budget of the municipality through a participatory process. So all the funds of the municipality are channeled through these systems. This was actually first created in Porto Alegre, and it's a city in Brazil, in Latin America. And it now has been replicated in over 700 cities in the world, showing how extraordinarily effective it is to give power to people rather than to mayors. Another extraordinary degrowth proposition is green public procurement or public procurement policies. There's the Preston model in the UK, which has built extraordinarily well implemented form of this idea, which is essentially that with the power of public procurement, such as buying school meals and buying hospital meals and all the things that the state needs to buy in order to function, you know, in order to provide the services we need as citizens, instead of buying them to large corporations, buy them to worker-owned cooperatives locally. And this basically transforms and brings lots of richness to the local economy rather than being siphoned out into economic and financial paradises. Other options, of course, other propositions of degrowth are community-supported agriculture, urban agriculture, and eco-villages, all of which green and bring biodiversity to our life and basically sequester carbon and transform the entire system of production of food into one that is actually beneficial to the planet rather than now that is one of the biggest contributors to the destruction of biodiversity and to the generation of climate change emissions. So there's also new forms of housing, such as co-housing, the rights to housing, housing co-ops, and community land trusts, which are basically non-capitalist forms of conceiving land ownership and land sharing, and allows the creation of communities of solidarity and trust. We also have platform cooperatives and open source technologies. So for example, instead of taking a cab from Uber, you can use EVA, which is a ride sharing co-op where the cabs basically own the platform and you can directly benefit them instead of a random corporation in the middle of the Silicon Valley and that probably doesn't pay taxes at all. Same with Airbnb. Instead of using Airbnb, you can use Airbnb that redistributes resources. Do you also have local credit unions or local currencies, which are basically local currencies used locally in order to buy local goods? Here we have the Occitan, which is from the region of Occitanie in France, but there are myriads of these. And essentially they maintain resources in the community rather than them be used or exported, siphoned elsewhere. All right, so also degrowth policies at the more national level, you have, for example, setting a maximum income. There's no reason for someone to be in any just or reasonable society having more than a certain amount of money. Why would anybody need to have 1 billion or even more euros? That is unfathomable. He will never be able to use it in his life, and perhaps not his sons and his sons of his sons. So there's no reason for that. And so maximum income is a very sensible policy to implement. Also universal basic income or job guarantee, reducing working hours, also green tax reform in order to tax resources instead of labor, and place a financial transaction tax is also very important, and a wealth tax in order to make sure that wealth is redistributed within society rather than just being siphoned to very few. We also have, of course, ending subsidies for polluting activities, supporting green activities instead, restricting advertising or even banning advertisement, especially for some specifically very polluting goods such as SUVs. There's no reason why we should continuously see our lives being denigrated by advertisement that tells us that we're not worthy, we're not good enough until we have the latest things. This is one of the biggest drivers of both personal misery and consumption, and that must be highly, highly restricted. And of course, replacing GDP as a goal with other indicators, well-being indicators. And there is a myriad of these that have been proposed and developed so far. I'm not going to go into them, but there are many alternatives. So how to get there? As I've shown some practices, I did show some policy options, but perhaps the most important thing to do now, right now, is to go to the streets and get it done and get it happen and force governments to get the changes that we need happening, because no political system is going to transform beyond its current structure, which is capitalism, and which we have to go beyond, because unfortunately the current system is not sustainable and cannot be, regardless of how we shift it and change it, no matter how much technology we put within it. We have to go to the streets and make a new one. And of course, elites are not going to just give away their power and let it happen. We have to take that. We have to make it happen, and it can happen peacefully if we go to the streets and all work together to generate this change. Thank you.
Hey, wow. Honestly, I really see the value of research in all of this. I mean, I have a lot of interest, and I'm sure a lot of people watching have a lot of interest in these things, but to see it all compiled like this obviously shows the value of being able to see these studies that, I mean, you talk about a lot of things that existed in the past, but maybe we're seeing a lot more of it being brought together in a really nice and understandable way. I think a lot of academia can be challenging for people to go in and out of a little bit at a time, but actually we're seeing so many of these working examples, it's really heartening. So I guess I have a couple of questions for both of you. You can kind of pick this up as you wish, but so imagining that I'm sat at home and I have an idea and I want to do something, I want to create something around degrowth where I live. What are the best resources to dip into to get started?
Olga, do you want to start?
You're talking about practices, so maybe you can start and I will just jump into.
Well, perhaps actually first visit our website. Well, if you're in the Netherlands, Ontgroei, but there's also degrowth research on, well, if you put degrowth.org, and there are plenty of options to activate and to start doing things differently. Degrowth is not necessarily a goal in itself. It's rather a bomb word. As some academics call it, or a word that forces us to imagine beyond capitalism, because growth and capitalism are absolutely intricately related necessities. So if we think of degrowth, it's rather to think of a concept that cannot be co-opted, that cannot be used for other purposes, such as sustainability or sustainable development, that is so easily, used for other purposes. So yeah, think about actions that lead to degrowing, sustainable, convivial world, and join movements that try to get there, such as, of course, Extinction Rebellion. There's also DM25, which is a democratic union of European in the European level, and it still applies for the UK. It sees Europe as a much more wider community, thankfully. And there are many movements that also the Eco Village movement. So I think try to find a movement that you enjoy, that you identify with, and join it, and go to the streets with them, and do what you unite in a common and solidary way.
Yeah, I could just add that again, there's well-being alliance, there's economy for the common good. You can find degrowth is just one alternative, and there are many, and they all have this idea in mind that we need to go beyond growth, beyond capitalism, beyond profit. So I think, in my opinion, we can create resources. So power is something that we can create. So important thing, as Martin said, is to organize, to get together, to discuss things that don't work and that need to be changed, and to have a courage to imagine different worlds, to have a courage to imagine different systems, and just go there and to get your voice heard.
Amazing. So I guess I would finish by a lot of the concept of environvolution this time. We've been focusing on the idea of how everyone wants to see the world, the planet look like post-pandemic. And obviously we've discussed a lot of future solutions. So I'm kind of curious how you see your future planet in terms of the next few years. What do you think will kind of happen with a lot of what we're talking about? What comes next? What do you think?
You mean in terms of the economy or our
work? the things, the trends, the things that people are really picking up and you're seeing kind of happening?
Well, we can see like in New Zealand, you see in Scotland, in Finland, the heads of the governments, they start adopting well-being budgets. You see in Amsterdam, the donut economy strategy. So those are very little steps forward that are being taken by local and national governments, and are being supported by really inspiring people such as Kate Raworth and others. So there are positive things happening, but of course they're not enough, because we have, as the science tells us, 10 years to address the climate emergency before we lock ourselves into a very dangerous trajectory. So I think that we maybe need to let ourselves to be inspired by those examples, but also push further. And as with the Black Lives Matter movement, you can see that a lot of changes are happening in the US. So we do have this power, and we need just to be very, just have a voice and to go there and discuss things. Sorry if I'm repeating myself. Martin, maybe you have to add something.
No, I agree absolutely with you. I think I just read the other day that protest movements have risen tenfold in 2019. And if things go as continuing and if the economy continues crashing without really, thinking about a different and alternative system, we're just all gonna bear the burden of a crashing society, and the least well-off will be even more hurt than they already are, and the wealthy will just stay safe. And of course we have to go to the streets as we did in 2011, but I think this will be much more massive. If you're looking at protests, as Olga said already, with Black Lives Matter and the protests that will be coming later on, now that we will be out of confinement, I think we really have to push. I mean, there's children in the street for climate change, there's people in the street for racial equality, there's people in the street to promoting for solidarity in France with the Gilets jaunes, in Ecuador, indigenous people fighting for their rights, in Chile, students fighting for a fair society. There is just way too much discontent, and it's just going to pop up. And I just feel like this crisis, the economic crisis, is just going to put even more pressure on the system. The system, of course, cannot respond to it by creating a new one, because that will make the elites lose their position of power. So it will just try to reinforce the cables as it did in 2011. But this time it just won't work. I mean, the loss of GDP and the loss of hope for the system that we've seen is much wider, I think. And I think people are much more conscious and are much more organized than they were in 2011, in 2008 when we had the previous crisis. So I think now is our time. Like if before they co-opted the movement, if before they were able to impose their own way, now we will be able to fight back, and we shall. And I think that's why we should really rise up to the occasion and rise and join a movement, join the Extinction Rebellion, and join DM25 if you're interested, and go to the streets and make it happen, because it's not going to happen by itself. Otherwise, we'll basically not have a planet to live in. So it's either we do things now, or really, I mean, it's hard to even imagine a future where we can even be having this discussion at all.
Well, it's good that we have all of the knowledge to learn how to take action. At the risk of running over, I will hand back to Tudor, but there's a lot more than we can say in half an hour. So I really recommend that everyone goes and checks out your website and finds out a lot more and starts to be inspired to take action.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks to the speakers. Fascinating conversation. One that we've been really meaning to try and make you squeeze within half an hour, but you've done a really good job. Anyone who wants to join the discussion on degrowth, then get in touch with these guys. I'm sure they'll be happy to help you out on Twitter. Go on, look on the Envirevolution page. You'll find links to the website for those guys. So thanks a lot, and thanks a lot, Dan, for hosting that one. I'm gonna say goodbye to you guys now. All the best, in the Netherlands, and we'll see you again soon.
Enjoy the rest.
Bye.
See you soon.
Bye,
guys.